Hi and welcome to our program. Today we are checking out Museum Jorn here in Silkeborg and its current exhibitions. So let's go for a guided tour.
Many of the artists that was part of the Cobra movement actually lived under some rather bad circumstances. They didn't earn money, they had families and they had to take care of their families. And Jorn was one of these artists who really struggled to survive. And he didn't compromise on the art, he wanted to do art, so it was not like he could go and get a job somewhere, because that was not part of the game for him. He was an artist, that was what he did for a living. So he got rather sick with tuberculosis in 1950-51. And so he was actually put on a train by his friends in the Cobra movement and sent back to Silkeborg without his family, because he just needed treatment and he wasn't, he didn't want to take it because he had all these interesting projects going on. But he was very sick and he was hospitalized here in Silkeborg for 17 months to recover. That's a long time actually, and he was really,
and he couldn't do anything.
He was almost dying, but then when he started recovering after some months, he also started painting again. And therefore a completely new style developed. So though we are known here at this museum as a Cobra museum, one of the Cobra museums in Denmark, if not the Cobra museum in Denmark, it actually is not a big chapter in our history, because it was a short chapter in Jorn's history. So we are representing him and his history. So it's actually quite short here, though we have a lot of work from the time. Because we are quickly on to the next chapter, which is maybe even more important. And that's when he starts doing these works. And that's during his hospitalization here in Silkeborg. He starts making some works that's really they're very dark, and they're having a lot of bite compared to what he did before, where it was much more experimenting. It was much more like free-spirited. It was also having some sense of humor, but now it's actually going in the other direction. There's not a lot of humor in this work here, which is called the Eagle's Share #2, and it's one of
heads like this.
Yeah. You can see it in different ways, right? But yeah, it's called the Eagle's Share. So we get some clues from the title of the work. It's from '51. And yeah, it's two heads, and what it's really, what it really shows is, it's a photograph. It's a painting that depicts power, and how power works. So it's using the eagle as a symbol of power, and it's not to say that the Nazi eagle was the only bad one, because Napoleon also had an eagle. The Roman Empire also had an eagle 2,000 years back, and also the Americans, they also have an eagle. So the eagle as a symbol of power and of this devastating power that's really killing people. So we have the claws here, the eagle, and under it we have a lot of blood, and we have a lot of body parts, right?
Like a skull there or something?
Yeah, and then there is a skull here. There's this demon-like cat over here as well. There's this grinning face here. It's very absurd. And then of course there's the two-headed eagle up here with big pointed teeth, that also as a shape resembles this mushroom-shaped cloud of a nuclear bomb. So that's also in it. So it's really like
a lot of things.
It's condensating the whole idea of everything that you learned from the Second World War, right? Everything that was kind of part of this time in the early 50s and the early start of the Cold War time. So this is a very dark painting for him, and this is where he's developing now. So this is also called the Golden Swine. It's a pig, but it's full of dollar signs around, and of course Jorn was a communist, so it's showing the capitalist swines, And then this one, which is quite interesting, because at this point he is actually very sick and can't breathe. He has this, tuberculosis is a lung disease. And this is called The Wounded Beast. And this very well shows where Jorn is moving now, because he's moving away from these rather short paint strokes from the Cobra time, and this very light, happy mood, and then into this world where he's actually really confronting what it means to be a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this animal here, and it's crying to the moon or the sun up here, and we have this fabric that's kind of coming out of it, like lungs that's coming out of its mouth. I think it's a very it's a very strong statement, and it definitely also shows how Jorn felt at this point, being very sick, being away from his family, who were still in Paris, and being and actually really trying to survive. And then when he started getting a certain degree of energy back, he also started to paint again, and that then painting, the idea of painting, or the process of painting, became sort of a therapy for him, a way of treating his own trauma, and a way of getting well, and of motivating himself and his organism to get well again. So he was painting his disease out onto the canvas, and the disease of the world as well, which we see with the eagles. Yeah, the eagles.
And the pig.
Yeah, or the pig. Yeah.
This seems like so layered, so heavy.
Yeah.
Like compared to the other ones, at least.
Exactly. Yeah. So he's working in a completely different way here. As you say, he's working with many layers, and he's also using. You can also see that he's using his body a lot. You know, he's really getting something out here. There is a certain aggression in the paint strokes.
Yeah. Yeah, usually because they're so smooth, usually because you don't really see them, and now you can clearly see the paint strokes.
And this will be quite characteristic from the Jorn we'll see from now on.
Okay. What about this one? I'm very curious, sorry.
Yeah, this one is quite interesting. It's called Valiant Resistance. And it's interesting because it's two shapes that they're merging. It's a man and it's a woman. And it's this idea of attraction, you know, also of actually having sex, but it's also the idea of being attracted to the other sex, and how that whole game works. So it's a valiant resistance. It's the idea of resisting it somehow. And Jorn also had a history with women. So at this point, he already had. This was his second wife he was with at this point, who actually originally was married to one of the other Cobra artists, Constant.
Oh.
And Jorn and her, they fell in love, so Jorn broke up with the wife he already had in Denmark. They had children together, and then he moved in with Matti, his new wife. So he had quite a history with women, and of course this somehow also works with that history, this idea of being attracted to women, but also of resisting it, because there's also a lot of trouble connected to
in this case
emotional
especially.
trouble. This case especially, yeah.
Yeah, and this one was after he was sick?
Yeah, this one is from 53.
Okay.
So but this is just after. Actually, when he started painting at the hospital here in Silkeborg, he was given the morgue, which is where they kept the corpses, to paint in. So first of all, it was a rather sinister place to work, and there was this smell there, or it was a space just next to the morgue. The smell of dead corpses and formaldehyde, which they used to preserve the body parts. So he painted there, and that's also part of the works from this era, you know. So he said that the dead bodies came in one way and he came out the other one. So he really was confronted with life, and he also found out that he wasn't young and invincible for the first time in his life, and that's really going to show in the works. This is a more matured artist who's dealing with women and with the attraction towards women in a more mature way than he would have been doing it in the 30s.
Yeah, but it's a nice painting.
It's really a wonderful painting, yeah, and quite important. And then when Jorn is actually hospitalized, he's also becoming part of the town again. So after being in Paris for several years, he kind of becomes part of the environment of the town again. That's also where he slowly starts to starts to build up this, or to make this construct of his own of making a museum there. So he gets involved with the historical museum here in town, the Museum of Cultural History in Silkeborg. They have some rather rare artifacts. They have a bug body, a bug man, among other things, which is a preserved body from the Iron Age. That's very well preserved, and it's actually known all over the world. It's the best preserved body from the Iron Age. It's here in Silkeborg, so they have this museum here, and Jorn became involved with them. And through the museum, and they found him quite interesting, because Jorn, at this point, didn't see himself as this individual artist, this modernist who's like inventing everything for the first time. He saw himself as a little piece in a very large puzzle of visual history, and so he saw himself, related to the artists from the Middle Ages, from the Iron Ages, and from Scandinavia in particular, from the north, because he thought that the way they were making artworks here in the north, or they were expressing themselves visually throughout the times, it was just as important as it was, down south, where they have the classicist traditions from Greece and the Roman Empire, etc. So he started doing a lot of research in this, and he also started working with that in his artworks, actually, this idea of being part of a history. So he was very inspired by the medieval frescoes in the churches, etc. And also in general in craftsmanship. And therefore he was given a grant when he worked at the museum to experiment with clay for the first time, and it was a wish he had. So not so far from Silkeborg, there is this village of Soring, where they have been producing clay products for many years. And so he went to Soring to experiment with clay on this grant. And the idea was he should produce a certain amount of objects, and then the museums should have those objects, most of them at least. And so he started experimenting with clay, and that quickly became, together with the painting, a rather central part of his production, working with clay, because he felt that in that way he would attach to a larger history. And one of the interesting works we have here is this one. It's called BURT, and it's interesting because it really it emphasizes something that's very central in Jorn's production and in his way of seeing art, or just his way of living, actually, because this wasn't supposed to look like this, but it fell from the table before it was burned by a mistake. And then the guy he worked with, he like kicked it, in the back here, and gave it this other kind of shape. And he wanted to throw it out because the idea was it should be standing like this because it's a bird, right? So the wings should come up instead of down. But it completely collapsed. And Jorn was like, oh, now it's perfect, now it's perfect. And then he put it up. So this idea of working with chance and allowing chance to play a part in the process of creating is also starting here at this point. And the idea of, well, sometimes actually the interesting things happens when you lose control a bit. That's where something unpredictable happens that will actually elevate the whole object.
That's a really nice thought.
It's quite a nice thought, and this one is the witness, so to speak.
What about that one? This is very peculiar thing.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's called the moon dog, and that's it's a plate, right? But it's carried by this weird structure. It almost looks like a machine that's carrying this plate, this face, and it's a dog. it's a face. It's not like the face of a dog. It's more a face of a human, right? It has the lips, it has the nose, and it has the big eyes. But it's looking at the moon. It's staring at the moon, and the moon is staring right back at it. And you can almost see the moon in the eyes, right? They're very big and very open. almost like one would imagine a werewolf, right?
Yeah. And
But
you know,
then
this is so weird. It seems like it's flesh.
Yeah, with that
Oh my gosh.
red coloring. Yeah, and he's using a very thin glaze on this one, and also allowing the clay to just stand out like this, like you would also see on Iron Age pottery, and where you also have the clay as an ornament in itself. You know, the structure of the clay.
Interesting.
It's quite interesting, and then the structure that's carrying it is also interesting, I think. We have a few works by Picasso here. Jorn was
Really?
also by, one can say also, this hand among other things is holding a fish. You can't work with modern ceramics without thinking about Picasso, and that was also an artist Jorn was admiring a lot, also for his ceramic pieces, because Picasso also worked with the history of the object, you know, the history of the clay, and the history of the motives, the variety of motives you can work with, such as the fish here. But then all of a sudden there is a big hand coming on it, right? There's always some sort of aesthetic surprise in it for Picasso, and Jorn as well uses that.
Yeah, it kind of has similar style, maybe. I don't know if I'm using
somehow.
the correct word.
Yeah, but definitely, yeah, I completely agree with you. But where Picasso is working very much with this, with these traditions of the Mediterranean world, Jorn is working with the tradition of the Nordic, world, and that's where he sees himself in a way as a Picasso of the North, without claiming to be a Picasso at all. But he sees himself as an ambassador for this particular style that was produced up here, and that maybe wasn't recognized properly during the time, at least according to Jorn. And then we have in here a work that I would very much like to show you. Actually, we have two works in here that's quite interesting. So we have over here, we have the light drawings made by a flashlight in front of a camera with a long exposure.
So he really works with a lot of
he's experimenting a lot, and this was an experiment that he did over the course of a day or something. It was not something he did for months or weeks. It was something rather spontaneous. But he read somewhere in a magazine that Picasso did it with, with a match or with a lighter or something, right? And then he did it with a candle like this, and then Jorn did it with a flashlight. The same thing. So this is how tall he is, right? And then this is his movement. So he's using his entire body to make the outline of the drawing. And we have this interesting machine where one can do a light drawing and send it to yourself. So
cool.
we have a light drawing machine, because this is quite a complicated way of making an image. It's also actually quite simple, but it's difficult to explain people how it's done.
Yeah.
So that's why we have this machine, so that people can get an idea of how to make a light drawing themselves.
So interesting.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. But then we have this major piece here. It's one of our
this is really big.
most central pieces at the museum. And this is the tapestry. So if you get very close to it, you can see that it's actually not painted on a canvas, though many people would say that, but at the first glance. But actually it is a tapestry.
Also by Jorn.
Also by Jorn. And he collaborated with Weimar, this young artist he met at Léger School in the 30s, one of his first friends in Paris. Weimar stopped painting during the Second World War and started taking up making tapestries instead. So Jorn wanted to do a tapestry. He was commissioned to do this rather large and prestigious task to do 2 or more decorations of the new gymnasium. It's like a high school in Aarhus, and it was a very sort of a structuralist building, functionalist building with a lot of sharp edges, a lot of concrete, a lot of glass, a lot of steel. And Jorn wanted to do something completely different. He wanted to build up this, this beast of art that would grow from within of this very confined shoebox, that would grow from within and would kind of come out everywhere somehow, like this kind of creative virus that was spread over this gymnasium. However, he was allowed to do one very large ceramic piece, which is today still at the gymnasium, and then to do this tapestry. And the reason why he wanted to do tapestries was because he also wanted to experience with that, but also because the history of tapestries goes back all the way to the Middle Ages, even it goes even earlier, where you use them in the big castles, these big stone, on the big cold stone walls to make them more warm and to make them feel more sort of human and organic. And he thought this gymnasium, which was made out of steel and concrete and glass, would also need something that was more organic, that was easier to kind of link to as a human with a body. So he made the sketches for this large tapestry and followed the process. It was made in a small apartment in Paris by up to 5 weavers, all women from different nationalities. And then Pierre Wimar was dyeing the yarn, so he was coloring the threads the threads used to make the tapestry here, to make the work here. And Jorn was making the sketches for it. And it took 17 months to make it.
Yeah, this seems a lot of work.
On one frame, on one weave.
Is there a theme or a topic, or is it completely random?
That's the interesting part of it, right? So it's called The Long Journey.
Okay.
And of course it's made for a gymnasium, so it's made for young people. Actually, it's made for everyone, but the main target group here is young people, and they're just in the beginning of their life, and somehow I think this is a way of preparing them for whatever may come, because you can project everything into it, and that's what's so wonderful about Jorn, is that he's really opening up the artworks for everyone, so that everybody can project something into them. We talked about the troll and the birds, the painting initially, and where we could see how everything was kind of double, how you could see one thing, but you can also see another thing in the figures. And that's what he's also doing here. He's adding a lot of little clues, but they're much more ambiguous now, because he knows how far he can go now. So it's not necessary to put 2 eyes and a mouth anymore. Now it's enough to do it like this, because he knows that this also works. So we've had people here from Syria, we have had refugees here who saw Aleppo, in ruins when they saw it. We have had elderly people who saw their life, they could pick out, they could kind of point at different chapters in their life here. We've had people from Greenland who saw the landscape from their village. So it's really an artwork that opens up the story so that you can project your own life into it. If you take your time and if you spend the energy on it, then this will really open up and you will start seeing a lot of things. We have a lot of children who see dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah, in it. This one over here, actually, that's. Many see a dinosaur in this one.
Ah, okay, yes,
that a very big dinosaur coming down.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have noticed if you didn't mention.
No, exactly, and I didn't see the dinosaur either before. There was one of our teachers here who told me that all the children has a tendency to see a dinosaur in this one. There also is a swan somewhere, which is actually very visible once you see it, but now I can't remember exactly where it's positioned. So there's some figures. This one is also, they also see this as a dinosaur or a giraffe up there coming in. So there's some of the figures that people read the same way, tend to read the same way, but then again, there also is a lot of figures that's just open for negotiation all the time.
Yeah.
There should be a total of more than 270 different colors and nuances in it.
200.
Yeah.
God.
It's quite something, right? It's 14 meters long.
Yeah.
And 1 meter and 80 tall. It's very heavy.
Really nice.
Yeah. And it's hand knitted, so, and that's also the idea that it should be made by hand. You know, you could do this on a machine also. Also here it's 1950. No, sorry, 1960, 59, 60. And so you could actually make it industrially produce this tapestry on a machine. It would be all flat, you know, and nice. But Jorn wanted it to be done by hand because that way all these little nuts that builds up this tapestry will all have a different, you know, they will all have a different tension, which means that it will actually have a surface like this. So it's a little uneven. It's a bit like a landscape, and that was the idea, that it shouldn't look too industrially produced. That would actually kill the idea of it. Then it would only be decoration, and this is not only decoration. This is an artwork.
Yeah.
And that was the idea of it. You need to have this feeling that this is made by people, by human hands.
Yeah, if you wanted to add humanity to those
Exactly.
steel walls.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
And it's really, I think it's really adding a lot of, it must have been adding a lot of warmth to that building.
For how long was there?
Well, it was taken down, is it 15 years ago now, so it was there for 50 years or so.
Okay.
Yeah. A little less maybe. It got too much light there as well, so we needed to put it in here, this rather, you know, this rather dim.
Did the
lightning.
color kind of fade away?
Yeah, it's not good for the colors.
Okay.
Yeah.
That explains the protections.
Exactly, exactly.
We hope you enjoyed this guided tour around Museum Jorn as much as we did. Thank you so much for staying with us, and see you next time.